Jack Mercer heard the scream and pulled his reins so hard his horse reared back. A man could tell himself it was none of his business. A man could keep riding. Jack had done that before, walked away from things that weren't his problem, and carried the weight of it for years. But that sound, thin, desperate belonging to something small and terrified cut straight through every reason he'd built to stay out of other people's trouble. He turned his horse toward the canyon, and that single turn changed everything. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1883 hit Wyoming like a punishment. The grass had gone the color of old bone by the end of June, and the creeks that used to run knee-deep on a horse were down to ankle-high trickles of brown water. Cowboys who'd worked the territory for 20 years said they'd never felt heat like it, the kind that pressed down on your shoulders from the moment the sun cleared the hills and didn't let go until well past dark, even then releasing only enough for a man to breathe, not to rest. Jack Mercer had been riding since before sunup. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was these days. Hurrying was something younger men did, men who still believed that moving faster got you somewhere better. Jack had learned slowly the way a man learns things he'd rather not, that most of the places you ran toward weren't worth the running. His ranch sat 12 miles northeast of Laramie, a modest spread of good grazing land, and one reliable water source, which made him luckier than most of his neighbors this summer, and he knew it. He was riding the back boundary of his property, checking fence posts the way he did every 2 or 3 weeks, noting where the wire had gone slack, where a post had leaned with the dry soil shifting underneath it. It was routine work. Quiet work. The kind of work a man could do without thinking too hard about anything. He was grateful for that. He had just rounded the eastern corner of his fence line where the property dropped down toward a dry wash that cut through a shallow canyon of red rock and pale dirt when he heard it. A child's scream, not a playful sound, not the high shriek of a kid startled by a grasshopper or racing a sibling across a yard. This was the sound of genuine terror, raw-edged, desperate, the kind of sound a child makes when the world has gone wrong in a way they don't have the words for yet. Jack's horse stopped before he pulled the reins. He sat very still for 3 seconds, maybe 4, listening. Then he heard it again, smaller this time, more a sob than a scream, but carrying that same undercurrent of real fear. He turned his horse into the canyon. The wash was narrow and wound between walls of crumbling red rock, the ground below hard-packed clay, with a few inches of powdery dust on top. His horse picked its way carefully, ears forward, and Jack let him set the pace. His own eyes moving ahead to where the canyon opened up slightly into a wider flat space before curving back on itself. He smelled it before he saw it. Horses, the sharp, iron-heavy smell of a horse in distress, and underneath that, the fainter scent of spilled grain and something medicinal, like a broken bottle of laudanum or camphor. The wagon had gone off the edge of a 3-foot drop where the trail curved. It wasn't a dramatic wreck, no cliff, no dramatic plunge, just a slow, grinding disaster where the right front wheel had caught in a rut. The horse had panicked, and the whole rig had tipped sideways and dragged itself down that small embankment until the axle snapped and everything stopped. But 3 feet was enough. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily, in the heat supplies scattered across 30 yards of canyon floor. A horse, a gray mare, older and road-worn, lay on her side in the traces. She was breathing, but her breaths came in long, shuddering heaves, and she wasn't trying to get up. One of her forelegs had folded beneath her at an angle that told Jack everything he needed to know. A woman lay in the dirt near the front of the wagon. She was on her back, one arm thrown out to the side, and she wasn't moving. And standing between Jack and the woman, her feet planted in the dust and her hands gripped around a length of broken wagon board, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 13 years old. Dark hair, dark eyes, a smear of blood on her left cheek from a cut above her eyebrow. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her boots were mismatched, one brown, one black, and her knuckles were white around that board, and she was looking at Jack the way a cornered animal looks at something larger than itself. Not frozen with fear. Calculating. "Don't come any closer," she said. Her voice was steady. That surprised him. Jack stopped his horse 15 feet back. He didn't reach for anything. He kept his hands loose on the saddle horn and looked past the girl to the woman in the dirt, checking for the rise and fall of breathing. He found it slow, shallow, but there. "I'm not coming closer," he said. "Not until you tell me to." "I won't tell you to." "That's your right." He glanced at the woman again. "Is that your mother?" The girl's jaw tightened. "None of your business." "Fair enough." He looked at the mare. The horse made a low, grieving sound, and he looked away from it. "How long have you been here?" She didn't answer. "The sun's been on that canyon wall for a while," he said. "Since before noon, I'd guess. It's past 3 now. That means you've been here close to 4 hours, maybe more." He waited. "Your mother needs water, so do you." "We have water." He looked around the canyon floor at the supplies scattered from the tipped wagon. He could see a shattered crock jar, its contents, long soaked into the dust. He could see a canvas sack that had split at the seam. He could see a lot of things, but he didn't see a water vessel that was intact. He didn't say that, he just waited. The girl's eyes moved to where he'd been looking. Her grip on the board shifted. "I said we have water," she repeated. And then, from the far side of the tipped wagon, a small voice said, "Emma, we don't." The girl. Emma closed her eyes for 1/2 second. Just one. Then she opened them again and looked back at Jack with the same hard expression. A small boy appeared around the edge of the wagon. He was maybe 7 years old, with dark hair like his sister, and enormous eyes that had been crying recently, and were thinking about starting again. He was holding the handle of a tin cup like it was something precious, but the cup was empty, and he was tilting it in his small hands the way children do when they're checking to make sure something's truly gone. "Noah," Emma said quietly, "go back around the wagon." "But Emma." "Noah." The boy looked at Jack, then back at his sister. Then he sat down in the dirt, right where he was, not going back around the wagon, but not coming any closer either. He set the empty tin cup between his feet and folded his hands in his lap with a precision that seemed far too formal for a 7-year-old, and he waited. Jack reached back into his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen. He held it up so the girl could see it. Then he held it out to the side and set it on a flat rock to his left, away from himself, within reach if she chose to cross toward it. "I'm going to stay right here," he said. "That water is just water. You don't owe me anything for it." Emma watched the canteen the way she might watch a rattlesnake that had gone still. "What do you want?" she asked. "Right now, nothing." He looked at her mother in the dirt. "She needs shade and water. The heat's not breaking today." "I know that." "I know you know it." He kept his voice even, no edge in it, no impatience. "I'm not telling you anything you haven't already figured out yourself. I'm just saying I can help with it if you'll let me." Emma didn't move toward the canteen, but she also didn't tell him to leave. That was something. He swung down from his horse, moving slowly, no sudden motions, and tied the reins to a chunk of rock without looking away from her. He crouched down to her level, not all the way to the ground, but low enough to take the height advantage out of the conversation, and he put his hands on his knees where she could see them. "My name is Jack Mercer," he said. "I own a ranch about 6 miles north of here. I was riding fence line when I heard—" He paused. "When I heard you needed help. I didn't ask for help." "No, you didn't." He nodded. "That's something too." The boy Noah had been watching this exchange with that unnerving, careful stillness of his. Now he spoke again, his voice very small. "Emma, Mama's really hot." Emma's face did something complicated that she controlled almost before it happened. Her eyes went to her mother for just a moment, then back to Jack. And Jack understood in that look everything she hadn't said. She was 13 years old, and she had been holding this situation together by the sheer force of her will for 4 hours in 100-degree heat, and she was close to the end of what will could accomplish. "If she has a fever," Jack said carefully, "shade and water won't be enough for long." "I know that," Emma said again. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. She pressed her lips together. Jack didn't say anything. He just waited, and he kept his hands where she could see them, and he didn't move. He had spent a long time learning how to be still. It hadn't come naturally. He'd been a restless young man, always wanting to do something, fix something, move things toward better. The years had taught him that stillness offered at the right moment was sometimes the most useful thing a person could give. Emma looked at the canteen on the rock. She looked at her brother. She looked at her mother. She didn't look at Jack. She walked to the rock and picked up the canteen and went directly to Noah, kneeling in the dust beside him and tilting water into the tin cup he still held between his feet. Noah drank it so fast she had to slow him with a gentle hand on his wrist. Then she took a small sip herself, just a small one, and stoppered the canteen and stood up. She walked back and held it out to Jack. He took it without a word. Then she said without quite looking at him, "She won't wake up." Jack stood. "How long?" "Maybe an hour. I don't know." She was talking, and then she stopped talking. Emma turned toward her mother. "She hit her head when the wagon went over. She hit it on the seat rail." "Is she bleeding?" "Not anymore." It stopped. He moved toward the woman, now slowly watching Emma's hands. She still had the board. She hadn't put it down, and he crouched beside Clara Whitmore and looked at her with the careful attention of a man who'd served 3 years in the Union Army as a young man and had seen enough of what bodies could and couldn't survive to know the difference between the two. Clara Whitmore was somewhere in her early 30s, dark-haired like her children, and even in the slack unconsciousness of her current state, she had a quality of held-in strength to her face, the kind that came from having carried serious things for a long time. The cut above her hairline had crusted over, which was good. Her breathing was shallow but regular. Her skin was hot. He pressed 2 fingers carefully to the pulse at her wrist. "She's alive," he said. "I know she's alive." Emma's voice had an edge in it now, the kind that comes from exhausted fear that's been sitting too long and has started to curdle. "I didn't think she was dead. I thought—" She stopped. "She just won't wake up." "Head injuries do that sometimes," Jack said. "The body shuts down to protect itself. It doesn't mean—" He looked up at Emma. "It doesn't mean the worst." Emma's eyes held his for a moment. She was deciding something. He could see it. "You have a ranch," she said. "Yes. 6 miles. About that. And you'd take us there." It wasn't a question exactly, more like she was saying it out loud to examine it the way you might turn something over in your hands to look for a flaw. "I would," he said. "Why?" He looked at her straight. "Because you need it." "That's not a reason. That's just a fact." He almost smiled at that. "You're right," he said. "It is just a fact, but it's the honest one." He stood. "I'm not going to tell you I'm a good man and expect that to settle it for you. You don't know me. You've got no reason to trust me, and everything your mother ever taught you is probably telling you right now that a stranger with a horse and water in an empty canyon is someone to be cautious about." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "But your mother needs shade and medical attention today," he continued. "Not tomorrow. Not when somebody comes looking. Today. And my ranch is the closest place that has both those things." A long silence. The wounded mare made that low suffering sound again, and Jack had to work to keep his expression neutral. He had made a decision about that horse that he would deal with when the children weren't watching, and he kept that decision carefully behind his eyes. Noah had gotten to his feet while the adults were talking. He stood a few feet from Jack now, studying him with the serious attention of a child who had decided that studying something carefully was the best protection against it. "Are you a good rider?" Noah asked. "Noah," Emma began. "It's a fair question," Jack said. He looked at the boy. "I've been riding since I was smaller than you are. Our horse is hurt," Noah said. He said it plainly, the way children state facts that adults are tiptoeing around because children haven't yet learned that some facts are supposed to be approached sideways. "I know," Jack said. "Can you fix her?" Jack held the boy's gaze for a moment. "Some things can't be fixed," he said quietly. "But I can make sure she doesn't suffer." Noah absorbed this with that uncanny stillness of his. Then he nodded a single serious dip of his head. Emma was watching her brother. And in watching her brother, she had stopped watching Jack with quite the same ferocious vigilance. Her board grip had loosened. Not gone, she still held it, but loosened. "You'd take all three of us," she said. "Yes. You don't even know who we are. I know you've been in this canyon for 4 hours in the worst heat of the summer, with your mother unconscious and your little brother thirsty," Jack said. "That's enough." Another silence. Longer this time. The canyon held the heat like a closed fist. Emma Whitmore looked at her mother. She looked at Noah. She looked at the empty tin cup Noah was still holding, and the shattered crock jar in the dirt and the ruined wagon lying on its side with that one wheel finally having stopped its slow spinning. She looked at Jack Mercer. Then she set the board down. Not dropped it, set it controlled and deliberate, her eyes on his the whole time. "If you try anything," she said, "I'll scream loud enough to bring every man in the territory." "I reckon you would," Jack said. "And I'm watching everything. Every single thing you do." "That's wise," he said. "Don't think you can." She stopped herself. Swallowed. "Just don't." "I won't," he said simply. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she gave one short, tight nod. Jack turned to his horse. He moved carefully, methodically, doing everything in plain sight with no sudden motions, pulling the bedroll from behind his saddle, shaking it out, laying it on a flat section of ground. He took his hat off and set it over Clara's face to give her shade while he worked. He checked his saddlebags for what he had: a second canteen half full, a strip of dried beef, a bandana he wetted with a small portion of water and folded carefully and pressed to Clara's forehead. He worked without narrating himself, without explaining each step, because Emma was watching every single thing, and she didn't need explanation, she needed evidence. He worked for 20 minutes. After the first 5, Noah came and crouched near his mother without being asked, holding her hand with a careful deliberateness like he was keeping her in place. After 10, Emma stopped hovering at Jack's left shoulder and moved to her mother's other side, kneeling in the dirt. After 15, she asked without looking at him, "How will you carry her?" "On the horse. I'll walk. 6 miles. "I've walked longer." Emma's hands folded in her lap. "She's going to be so angry," she said softly. It came out like it surprised her, the thought. "At me. At all of it." A pause. "She doesn't like needing help." Jack thought about that. "Most people who are worth something don't," he said. "Doesn't mean they can't accept it." Emma looked at him sideways. He went back to work. It took another half hour to get Clara Whitmore settled against Jack's horse, positioned to be carried carefully the 6 miles back to the Mercer Ranch. Noah walked close to the horse's shoulder, one small hand on the saddle leather. Emma walked on the other side of her mother, close enough to catch her if anything shifted. Jack walked at the horse's head and led him steady. None of them talked much during that walk. There wasn't much to say that the heat and the dust and the slow rhythmic sound of hooves on baked earth didn't already say for them. But somewhere around the 2nd mile, Noah reached out and put his small hand briefly on Jack's forearm, just for a second, just a light touch the way children do when they are deciding without words that something is probably all right. Jack didn't say anything. He just kept walking north. And somewhere in that silence, in that long walk under the punishing Wyoming summer sky, 3 people who had never met before that afternoon became, without anyone deciding it, something that resembled in its fragile and tentative way the very beginning of a unit. Clara Whitmore still hadn't woken up. The ranch came into view just as the sun started its long descent, the light going amber and then copper, the shadows of the fence posts stretching long across the dry grass. Jack's dog, an old brown hound named Rufus, met them at the gate, and Noah stopped walking to stare at the dog, and the dog stared back, and then Noah said very quietly, "Hi." The dog's tail moved. That was the first easy moment of the entire day. Jack pushed open the gate and led the horse through. He had no idea, standing there in the long copper light of a Wyoming summer evening with two exhausted children and an unconscious woman and his old dog walking in slow circles, that the next morning would bring something far worse than a wrecked wagon and a cracked skull. He had no idea that the name Whitmore was about to mean something very different than he understood it to mean. He was just a man with a ranch and a water source and a set of hands that knew how to be useful. He brought them inside. Clara Whitmore woke up fighting. That was the first thing Jack learned about her. Not stirring slowly, not blinking into consciousness with confusion and fragility the way most people did after a hard knock to the head. She came up fast, one hand grabbing the edge of the cot, the other swinging before her eyes were fully open, and if Jack hadn't already taken a half step back, she would have caught him across the jaw with surprising force for a woman who'd been unconscious for the better part of 5 hours. Emma. Her voice came out rough and cracked. Emma, I'm here. Emma was across the room in 3 steps, and she moved with that same controlled speed Jack had seen in the canyon, nothing wasted, nothing panicked, just direct and certain. She caught her mother's reaching hand. Mama, I'm right here. Stop. Clara stopped. Her eyes found Emma's face, and she held it like a woman holds on to something in a current. Noah, she said, he's asleep. He's fine. He's on the other cot. Clara's eyes moved to the cot in the corner where Noah lay curled on his side, one arm tucked under his head, his chest rising and falling in the slow, easy rhythm of a child who has exhausted himself completely and surrendered to sleep without reservation. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked around the room, the rough-hewn walls, the single window with the dark of full night outside it, the oil lamp on the table, the unfamiliar quilt folded at the foot of the cot she was lying on. Then she looked at Jack. Her eyes were dark and sharp and fully awake, and the look she gave him was not the look of a woman who was grateful to be alive in a stranger's house. It was the look of a woman calculating exactly how much danger she was in and from which direction it was most likely to arrive. "Who are you?" she said. "Jack Mercer. This is my ranch." "How did I get here?" "He carried you," Emma said. "On his horse. He walked the whole way." Clara's gaze moved back to Jack. Something shifted in it, not softening exactly, more like a recalibration. "You found us in the canyon," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Emma let you help." It wasn't quite a question. Emma answered it anyway, her voice carrying a faint defensive edge. "You wouldn't wake up Mama. We were out of water. Noah was—" She stopped. "I made a decision." Clara looked at her daughter for a long moment. Something passed between them that Jack couldn't fully read, the compressed communication of two people who had survived things together and developed a private language for it. "All right," Clara said quietly. She pushed herself to sitting. Jack moved forward instinctively, and she put her hand up flat and firm, stopping him at arm's length. "I've got it," she said. He stepped back. She sat up the rest of the way on her own, and he could see the effort it cost her, the slight tightening around her eyes, the controlled set of her jaw. But she didn't waver, and she didn't ask for his hand. She sat on the edge of the cot and breathed for a moment and looked at the floor. "There's water on the table," Jack said. "And some broth. It won't be as good as it ought to be. I'm not much of a cook, but it's hot and it'll do." Clara looked at the table. She looked at the mug sitting beside the lamp. She didn't move toward it. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "why did you help us?" Emma made a small sound that might have been exasperation. Jack ignored it. "Same reason I'd help anybody I found in that canyon in that condition," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got, ma'am." Clara's eyes stayed on him. She was testing something he could feel it, that particular quality of attention that meant someone was listening not to your words, but to everything underneath them. "We're not a charity case," she said. "No, ma'am. You're a woman with a head injury and 2 children who needed shade and water. That's different from charity." A pause. "And now?" she said. "Now you're a woman with a head injury and 2 children who need a night's rest and a proper meal in the morning." He kept his voice even. "After that, whatever you want to do is your business. I'll help you figure out where to go from here. Or I'll stay out of it entirely. That's your call to make." Clara Whitmore looked at him for a long measuring moment. Then she reached for the mug of broth. She drank it slowly, both hands wrapped around the mug, her eyes down. When it was gone, she set the mug on her knee and said without looking up, "Where are our things?" "What survived the wagon I brought in? It's in the other room. I didn't go through it, just stacked it." "The wagon itself?" "Gone. The axle snapped clean." "I'm sorry." She nodded. One small contained nod. "The horse." Jack said nothing for a moment. Clara looked up. "She didn't suffer long," Jack said. Emma was watching her mother. Clara's knuckles went white around the mug for just a second. Then she set the mug down on the cot beside her and said, "She was a good horse, 12 years. A pause. "Her name was Dory." "That's a good name for a horse," Jack said. Clara almost smiled. It was the ghost of one barely there, gone before it really arrived. But it was something. She lay back down without being asked, and Emma pulled the quilt up without being told, and the room settled into a quiet that felt for the first time since the canyon like something close to safe. Jack picked up the lamp from the table. "I'll be outside if you need anything," he said. "Call out and I'll hear you." "Mr. Mercer?" He stopped at the door. Clara was looking at the ceiling. "Thank you," she said. Not warmly, not with any particular softness. Just plainly the way someone states a fact they'd rather not owe, but won't deny either. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He went out and pulled the door shut behind him. He sat on the porch in the dark for a long time after that, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the creak of the barn, the far-off call of something in the hills, the low, steady breathing of the land in summer dark, and thinking about the particular quality of the look Clara Whitmore had given him. He'd been looked at that way before, by people who had learned through hard experience that trusting the wrong person cost more than they could afford to lose again. He understood it. He didn't take it personally, but he sat with it. Morning came fast in Wyoming in July, the light arriving sudden and total like someone had thrown open a door, and by the time Jack had coffee on the stove, Noah was already awake and standing in the doorway between the two rooms, watching him with those large, careful eyes. "Good morning," Jack said. "Good morning," Noah said. He didn't move from the doorway. "You hungry?" "Yes." "Sit down. I'll get eggs on." Noah came and sat at the table with that formal precision of his hands folded back straight, like a child who'd been taught table manners by someone who took them seriously. He watched Jack move around the kitchen with the focused attention of a scientist observing an experiment. "You live here alone?" Noah asked. "I do." "How come?" Jack cracked an egg into the pan. "Just the way it worked out." "Don't you get lonely?" Jack thought about lying and decided against it. "Sometimes," he said. Noah seemed to find this satisfying. "We used to live in a house with a garden," he said. "Mama grew tomatoes. Emma says she doesn't remember what they tasted like, but I think she's lying because she used to eat them all the time and I saw her." Jack set a plate in front of the boy. Noah looked at it, looked at Jack, then unfolded his hands and picked up the fork. "Emma says I talk too much," Noah said. Emma might be right. Noah considered this. "She usually is," he said without apparent resentment. "It's annoying." Jack sat down across from him with his own coffee. "Where were you headed before the canyon?" Noah looked up. Something in his face went careful. "Mama said to ask her about that." "Fair enough. She's good at telling stories about it. Better than me." He went back to his eggs. "But I think we were going away from something, not toward something. That's different, isn't it?" Jack looked at this 7-year-old boy. "Yeah," he said. "That's different." Emma appeared in the doorway minutes later, already dressed, already guarded, and she looked at Noah, eating at Jack's table with an expression that mixed relief and something more complicated. The particular feeling of someone who has been responsible for everything for so long that watching someone else provide something creates an emotion they don't have a name for. "Sit down," Jack said. "There's more. I can make my own." "Sit down, Emma." She sat. Not because he'd told her to, the set of her chin said clearly, just because it was a reasonable thing to do. They ate in a silence that was almost companionable. Almost. Then Emma set down her fork and said, "What are you going to want in return?" Jack looked at her. "For last night," she said. "The food, the beds. People don't do things for free. I'm not stupid." "I know you're not stupid," Jack said. "And I don't want anything in return." That's what dangerous men always say. He'd heard that from her before in the canyon in those first hard minutes. He looked at her straight and said what he'd said then. "That's true. It is what dangerous men say." He paused. "It's also what men who mean it say. You'll have to watch me long enough to figure out which kind I am." Emma's eyes held his. "How long?" "As long as you need." She picked her fork back up. She didn't say anything else, but the particular quality of her silence changed just slightly, just enough that Jack noticed it. Less like a wall, more like a door she hadn't decided yet whether to open. Clara came out of the back room an hour later, moving carefully, one hand on the doorframe, and the room rearranged itself around her entrance, the way rooms do when the person who matters most to the people in them arrives. Noah went still and watchful. Emma straightened. Jack stood. Clara looked at the table, at the plates, at Noah's clean-scraped empty plate. "He fed you," she said to Noah. "Eggs," Noah said. "They were good. Better than the ones at the—" He stopped, glanced at Emma. "Sit down, Mama," Emma said. "I'll get you coffee." Clara sat across from Jack, and they looked at each other across the table with the frank, slightly uncomfortable awareness of two adults who are strangers and have been deposited into a situation of considerable intimacy without having chosen it. "How's your head?" Jack asked. "Sore." She accepted the coffee from Emma without taking her eyes off Jack. "Mr. Mercer, I need to know what our situation is." "What do you want to know?" "The wagon is gone. The horse is gone." She said it the way someone takes inventory of a disaster, methodically not yet allowing themselves to feel each item on the list, just counting. "We have what you carried back from the canyon." "Yes, ma'am." "We were traveling to my brother's homestead. He's in Colorado, near Pueblo." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I don't know how far we are from a stage line." "Laramie's about 12 miles. Stage runs twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. Today is Wednesday," Jack said. A pause. Clara absorbed this. "So, 6 days? If you're taking Friday's stage, which you don't have to." "I'm not asking for more charity, Mr. Mercer." "I know you're not." He kept his voice level. "I have a wagon. I can take you into Laramie myself once you're steady on your feet. Today, if you feel up to it. Tomorrow, if you don't." Clara looked at him. That same calibrating look she'd given him last night when she first woke up. "Why?" she said. "You asked me that last night? I'm asking again." Jack set his coffee down. He thought for a moment about the honest answer, not the easy one, not the one that would smooth the moment over, but the actual honest one. "Because you've got 2 kids," he said, "and you're 2 days out from a head injury. And something in the way your boy watches the door tells me you weren't just traveling to Colorado." He paused. "You were running from something, and whatever it is, it's not gone just because you had an accident." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jack had heard in a long time. Noah had gone very still. Emma was looking at her mother with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite managing it. Clara set her mug down very carefully. "That is not your concern," she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely controlled. "No, ma'am," Jack agreed. "It's not." Another silence. Then from outside, the sound of hoofbeats on the dry road leading to the ranch gate. More than one horse, moving with the particular purposeful pace of people who know where they're going, Jack was at the window before he'd consciously decided to move. 2 riders. He didn't recognize them. They weren't cowboys passing through. Their clothes were too clean for that, their horses too well kept. The taller one had something in his coat pocket that made the fabric sit wrong on one side. He looked back at the table. Clara had gone perfectly still, her hands flat on the tabletop, her eyes fixed on a point about 6 inches in front of her. Emma had seen something in her mother's face that made her push her chair back from the table. "Mama," Emma said quietly. "Who is that?" "Go to the back room," Clara said. "Take Noah." "Mama." Emma. Her voice dropped to something so controlled it was frightening. "Take your brother and go to the back room right now." Noah had already slid off his chair. He took Emma's hand, and Emma looked at Jack with an expression that contained in compressed form a question, a warning, and something that was not quite a plea, but was adjacent to it. Jack gave her a single short nod. She took Noah to the back room and closed the door. Jack turned from the window. Clara was standing now, both hands braced on the table. "You know those men," he said. "Not those men specifically." Her voice was steady. Everything about her was steady, in the way that things are steady when they've been braced against a wind that's been blowing for a long time. "But I know who sent them." "Who?" She looked at him. For a moment, he thought she wasn't going to answer. "My father-in-law," she said. "Harlan Whitmore." The name didn't mean anything to Jack. But the way she said it, compressed and flat, the way you say a word that you've said so many times in private, fear that you've worn all the inflection out of it, told him that it should. A knock at the door. Hard and certain. Not the knock of a man who expects to be turned away. Jack and Clara looked at each other across the table. "What does he want?" Jack asked. "My children," Clara said. "And my land." The knock came again. Jack crossed to the door. He opened it before she could tell him not to, and he opened it all the way, the full width, and he stood in it with his hands loose at his sides and his feet shoulder-width on the floorboards. The taller of the 2 men was maybe 40, with a thin, well-trimmed mustache and the particular expression of someone who has spent a long time being the authority in rooms and has stopped being comfortable when that isn't immediately acknowledged. "Looking for a woman named Clara Whitmore," the man said, "and her children." "Lots of people in Wyoming?" Jack said. The man's eyes moved past Jack's shoulder into the room. Jack stepped slightly to the right, blocking the angle. "I've been asked by Mr. Harlan Whitmore of the Whitmore Land Company to locate Mrs. Whitmore and ensure the safe transport of his grandchildren to—" "Grandchildren," Jack said. "That's right. He sent 2 of you." "Yes, sir." "With papers, I'd guess." The man's hand went to his coat pocket. "I have documentation from a judge in—" "Which judge?" Jack said. A pause. Brief, but there. "Judge Harold Fenwick of—" "Never heard of him," Jack said. "Which isn't conclusive, I know, but it's worth noting." He looked at the second man who hadn't spoken, then back to the first. "Mrs. Whitmore had an accident yesterday. She's under medical care. She won't be going anywhere today." Mr. Whitmore's instructions were to— "Mr. Whitmore's instructions," Jack said with the same level tone he'd used all morning. The same even quality, "Don't carry any weight on my property." He held the man's gaze. "You've delivered your message. I'll let Mrs. Whitmore know you came. When she's recovered, if she chooses to contact Mr. Whitmore, that'll be her choice to make." The man's jaw tightened. He looked past Jack again. "Sir, if you're harboring—" "I'm not harboring anything," Jack said. "I'm a rancher who found a woman and her children in a canyon after an accident. They slept in my spare room. That's the whole of it." He kept his voice easy, kept his hands away from his sides, kept everything about his posture deliberately, visibly calm. "Now, I'm going to ask you to step back off my porch." Another pause. The second man shifted his weight. His eyes moved to Jack's right hip, the holster there, the Colt. Jack didn't touch it, didn't look down at it, just held the first man's gaze. "We'll be back," the man said. "I expect you will be," Jack said. "Good day to you both." He stood in the doorway until they'd ridden back out through the gate. He watched them until they were small in the distance, Then he closed the door and turned around. Clara was standing 3 feet behind him. He hadn't heard her move. She'd crossed the room in complete silence and been standing just behind his left shoulder the entire time. Her face was very still. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," Jack said. "I didn't. That's going to make things harder for you." "Maybe." "Harlan Whitmore doesn't—" She stopped, started again. "He's not a man who accepts no from people he considers beneath him. And he considers nearly everyone beneath him." "I've met that kind of man before," Jack said. "Not like him." Something moved across her face. Not fear exactly. The memory of fear which is different and in some ways worse. "He has lawyers. He has judges. He has—" She pressed her fingers to her temple for a moment. "He had my husband's ear for 20 years, and my husband thought he hung the moon. And when Thomas died, there was nothing between Harlan and everything Thomas left us. Nothing except me. And he's been working on removing that obstacle ever since." The back room door opened. Emma stood in the gap. Noah was visible just behind her, one hand on Emma's sleeve. Emma looked at her mother, then at Jack. "They're gone," she said. "For now," Jack said. "For now," Emma repeated. The way she said it made clear she understood exactly what those two words meant. Noah came out from behind his sister and crossed the room and stood beside his mother and took her hand. Clara looked down at him, and something in her face shifted, that controlled stillness cracking just slightly at the edges, the way ice does before it goes. She didn't cry. Jack had a feeling Clara Whitmore hadn't let herself cry in a very long time, but she held Noah's hand very tightly. "He followed us," Emma said. She said it like she was confirming something she'd already suspected, something she'd hoped she was wrong about. "He has people watching the roads," Clara said. "He probably knew we left within hours." "Then going to Laramie won't help," Emma said. "He'll have someone at the stage." "Probably. And in Colorado if he finds out Uncle David's address." "Emma?" Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "Not right now." Emma closed her mouth. She looked at Jack. Jack looked at Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I think you'd better tell me the whole of it." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the summer heat was building toward its daily worst, pressing down on the dry land, and the silence in the room had a weight to it that was different from the silences of that morning. Heavier, sharper, carrying more. "Why?" she said. And this time the word didn't sound like a challenge. It sounded like a woman asking something she genuinely didn't know the answer to, hadn't known for a very long time, maybe had stopped expecting to find. Jack pulled out a chair from the table and sat down. He folded his hands on the tabletop, and he looked at her straight. "Because those men know you're here now," he said. "And that means whatever's happening to you is happening here too, on my land." He paused. "And I don't much like the idea of not knowing what I'm dealing with." Emma made a sound that might in a different moment have been a very short laugh. Noah looked up at his mother. Clara looked at Jack, and then she sat down across from him, and she began to talk. She talked for a long time. She told him about Thomas Whitmore, Thomas who had been good and honest, and who had inherited his father's last name and very little of his father's nature. Thomas, who had built a decent spread of his own outside of Cheyenne, who had kept Harlan at arm's length as much as a man could keep his own father at arm's length, who had died of fever in November of the previous year, leaving Clara with 60 acres of good land and a water right that Harlan Whitmore had been trying to acquire for 15 years. She told him about the lawyers who had appeared within 3 weeks of Thomas's burial, about the documents that questioned her fitness, about the neighbor who had been paid she was almost certain to report to Harlan that she was struggling, that the children were unsupervised, that the property was going to seed. She told him about the morning 4 months ago when she'd woken up to find a man she didn't know standing in her kitchen, having walked in through the unlocked back door at dawn, and how he'd said very politely that Mr. Whitmore had sent him to talk about a purchase offer for the property, and that it would be in her best interest to listen. She told him how she'd picked up the cast iron pan from the stove and told the man to get out of her house. Emma at this point said, "She really did?" with a flat certainty that suggested she'd witnessed it. Jack looked at Clara Whitmore. The headache was visible in the set of her eyes, the slight tension around them, but she held herself straight and told it all plainly, the way someone recites a list of injuries, not asking for sympathy, just establishing facts. "So you ran," Jack said. "I left," Clara corrected him, "with my children and what I could carry, to go to my brother's, and Whitmore followed." "Whitmore has people everywhere between here and the Colorado border." She paused. "I thought I could get far enough fast enough. The accident—" For the first time, something flickered in her expression. "I pushed too hard. The road through that canyon was a shortcut. The map said it was passable." "It usually is," Jack said. "The heat dried the ground out this summer more than most." Clara nodded. She looked at her hands on the table. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I appreciate what you've done. I do. But you understand now why we need to leave." "I understand why you think you do," Jack said. She looked up. "Those men know you're here," he said. "They'll send word to Whitmore today. By tomorrow, he'll know exactly where you are. If you get on a stage in Laramie, he'll know where you're going." He kept his voice level. "Running isn't going to work anymore, Mrs. Whitmore. He's too close." The room was quiet. Emma was listening with the focused, unblinking attention of someone who is learning things they needed to know a long time ago. Noah had moved to sit on the floor near the wall, with his knees pulled up, listening without pretending not to. "Then what?" Clara said. Her voice was controlled, but just under it was something exhausted and raw. "What do you suggest, Mr. Mercer?" Jack thought about it. He thought about the two writers and the careful way the taller one had said the word documentation. He thought about Clara's 60 acres outside Cheyenne and a water right someone wanted badly enough to send lawyers and judges and writers and quiet threats through unlocked doors. "You stop running," he said, "and you make him come to you on ground you choose." "That's easy to say." "Yes, ma'am, it is." "He has lawyers." "I know a man in Laramie," Jack said. "Name of Hargrove. He's not fancy, but he knows the territorial land code better than anybody between here and Denver, and he owes me a conversation." Clara stared at him. Emma had gone very still. "Why would you do that?" Clara said. "Why would you do any of this?" Jack looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Noah on the floor against the wall, and Emma standing with her arms crossed tight across her chest. And he thought about the canyon, and the empty tin cup, and the broken crock jar, and a 13-year-old girl standing with a wooden board against everything the world had decided to throw at her. "Because somebody should," he said. The silence after that was different from all the other silences of the morning. Clara Whitmore looked at Jack Mercer across the plain wooden table in the plain wooden kitchen of his ranch, and for the first time since she'd woken up swinging on that cot, the calculating vigilance in her eyes shifted just slightly, just enough into something else. Not trust. Not yet. But the recognition, fragile and careful, that trust might be something she hadn't yet run out of entirely. Noah looked up from the floor. "Does your lawyer friend like eggs?" he asked. Emma put her hand over her eyes. Jack almost laughed. It came out as more of a breath, a single quiet exhale, but it was the closest thing to a laugh that had happened in that kitchen in longer than he could remember. "I expect he eats them," Jack said. "Good," Noah said seriously. "Because you're good at eggs." And somewhere in that small, ridiculous moment, in the middle of all that danger and distrust, and the long shadow of Harlan Whitmore falling across a ranch in Wyoming, something shifted in the room. Not much, but enough. Walter Hargrove was not a man who appreciated being pulled out of his office before 10 in the morning, and he made that clear to Jack in the doorway of the small building on Laramie's Main Street that served as his practice, his storage room, and on more than one occasion, his sleeping quarters. "Jack Mercer," he said, looking at Jack, then at Clara, then at the two children behind her. "You look like a man who's decided somebody else's trouble is his trouble." "Morning, Walter," Jack said. "Can we come in?" Hargrove stepped back and let them through. He was a short man, wide through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had never been handsome, but had settled into something better than handsome over the years trustworthy. He had a lawyer's habit of listening with his whole body leaning slightly forward, his eyes moving between speakers without missing the spaces between words. He listened to Clara without interrupting. She sat across from his desk and laid it out the same way she'd laid it out to Jack that morning at the kitchen table, methodically, without ornament, the way a person presents evidence rather than a grievance. The 60 acres, the water right, Thomas's death, the lawyers, the man in her kitchen, the riders who had appeared at Jack's ranch that morning before the dew had finished burning off the grass. When she finished, Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "Harlan Whitmore," he said. "Yes." "Of the Whitmore Land Company?" "Yes." Hargrove looked at Jack. "You know who that is?" "I'm learning," Jack said. "He's bought up 40,000 acres of Wyoming territory in the last 8 years, Hargrove said. "Mostly through purchase, some through pressure, a few through methods that nobody's been able to prove in a court of law, but that leave a particular smell behind them." He looked back at Clara. "Your husband's land is the last parcel between his northern holdings and the Sweetwater River access. With that water right, he controls irrigation for the entire North Range come dry season." "I know," Clara said. "Thomas knew. That's why he never sold." "And now Thomas is gone." "Yes." Hargrove picked up a pencil and turned it between his fingers. "He's filing for guardianship of the children," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara's jaw tightened. "He says I'm unfit." "On what grounds?" "Abandonment of the family property, unstable living situation, inability to provide." Her voice stayed flat. "Everything that became true the moment he made it impossible for me to stay." Emma, sitting in the chair nearest the window, said quietly, "He made the ranch unsellable too. She didn't tell you that part." Clara looked at her daughter. "The neighbor," Emma continued, looking at Hargrove. "The one who was reporting to Whitmore. He started telling people in town that the property had a disputed title. Nobody would buy it, even if she wanted to sell. She couldn't leave, and she couldn't stay." Hargrove's pencil stopped moving. He looked at Emma with a new quality of attention. "How old are you?" 13. He looked at Clara. "She's right, isn't she?" "Yes," Clara said quietly. "That's not pressure," Hargrove said. "That's a trap." He set the pencil down. "The disputed title claim. Do you have the original deed?" "In my bag. I brought everything I could carry. I need to see it." He stood. "I also need to see the water right documentation and anything your husband signed in the last 2 years of his life." He paused. "Did Whitmore ever ask Thomas directly to sign anything?" 3 times that I know of," Clara said. "Thomas refused each time. The 3rd time, they didn't speak for 4 months afterward." "Did Thomas write that down anywhere? A letter, a diary, anything?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "He kept a journal," she said. "Where is it?" "In my bag." Hargrove looked at Jack. "You understand what you've stepped into." "Getting clearer every minute," Jack said. "Whitmore will come after you directly once he knows you're sheltering them." "He already sent 2 men this morning," Jack said. Hargrove was quiet again. Then he said, "I need 3 days to look at the documents. Maybe 4. He looked at Clara. "In the meantime, you cannot leave Jack's ranch. Not for Laramie, not for the stage, not for anything. If Whitmore's people see you moving, they'll use it." "We're imposing on Mr. Mercer enough already," Clara said. "Mrs. Whitmore." Hargrove's voice was not unkind. "Harlan Whitmore has a judge in Cheyenne who will sign whatever he's put in front of him for the right consideration. If he gets a guardianship order before I have a chance to challenge the underlying fraud those children go with whoever shows up holding the paper. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The room went very still. Noah, who had been sitting on a small bench near the door, maintaining his characteristic careful silence, looked up at his mother. Clara looked at her son for a long moment. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to control this time. Then she looked back at Hargrove. 3 days, she said. Maybe 4. All right. She looked at Jack. He gave her the same short nod he'd given Emma in the doorway that morning. She held it for a moment, reading something in it. Then she looked away. They drove back to the ranch in Jack's wagon, with the sun already high and punishing, and nobody said much. Emma sat in the wagon bed with Noah and didn't look at the road. Noah leaned his shoulder against his sister's arm, the way small children lean into warmth without thinking about it, and Emma let him, which told Jack something about what was happening inside her that her face wasn't showing. They were halfway back when Clara said quietly, and without looking at him, "He's going to come himself." Whitmore. "Once those men report back, he won't send lawyers next time. He'll come." She paused. "He likes to look at people when he takes things from them." Jack kept his eyes on the road. "What's he like?" Clara thought about that for a moment. "He's charming," she said. "That's the first thing. He's very charming. He remembers names. He asks after people's families. He has a way of making you feel when he's talking to you that your concerns are the most important thing in the room." She paused again. "And then he does exactly what he came to do, and you realize the charm was never about you at all. It's just a tool he keeps oiled." Thomas didn't see it that way. Thomas saw it. He just loved his father anyway. A long pause. "That's not a character flaw. That's just being a son." Jack said nothing. He understood something about that kind of love, the kind that doesn't require the object of it to deserve it. He'd carried some of that himself once for a man who hadn't earned it. They arrived back at the ranch to find Rufus lying across the porch steps in the heat, and a folded piece of paper tucked into the doorframe. Jack handed the reins to Clara, without a word stepped down from the wagon and took the paper. He read it standing on the porch with his back to the wagon. Then he folded it again and put it in his shirt pocket and turned around. "Jack," Clara said. She'd seen something in his face. "Come inside," he said. He waited until the door was closed and the children were at the table before he took the paper out again and set it flat on the table. It was a single page, the handwriting formal and precise. At the top it bore the seal of the Wyoming Territorial Court. He watched Clara read it. He watched the color leave her face. "It's a temporary guardianship order," she said. Her voice came out strange too, even the kind of even that comes from forcibly suppressing something large. "It was issued yesterday morning in Cheyenne." "Yesterday morning," Jack said, "before those men even arrived here." "He knew we were in the territory before we got to the canyon," Clara said. "He already had the order ready. The accident just delayed his timeline." "What does it say?" Emma asked. She'd been reading her mother's face. Clara looked at her daughter, then at Noah. "It says," she said carefully, "that a court has decided temporarily that your grandfather should determine where you live." Emma understood immediately. Jack saw it the way her face went absolutely blank, the specific blankness of someone whose worst expectation has just been confirmed. "He can't do that," Emma said. "He has a paper that says he can," Clara said. "That paper is wrong." "Emma, that paper is wrong." Emma's voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her lips together hard, controlling it. "Mama, that paper is wrong." "Yes," Clara said quietly. "It is." "Then it doesn't matter what it says." Clara looked at her daughter for a long moment. "It matters until we can prove it's wrong," she said. "That's how the law works." "That's not how the law is supposed to work," Emma said. "No." Clara's voice softened in a way Jack hadn't heard from her before. "No, it's not." Noah had not said anything. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, looking at the paper, and his expression was the one Jack had come to recognize as Noah's thinking face, very still, very focused, working through something. "He's not my grandfather," Noah said. Everyone looked at him. "Papa said he was," Noah continued. "But Papa also said that family is who takes care of you, not just who you're related to." He looked up. "That man doesn't take care of us. Mama does." He looked at Jack. "And now you do." The room was quiet. Jack folded the paper closed. "I need to get this to Hargrove tonight," he said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." "The office will be closed," Clara said. He lives above the office. He won't mind. He looked at Clara. This changes what he needs to look at. If Whitmore had this order ready before those men came here, he was planning to use the accident or something like it as his opportunity. He may have more ready. Clara stood. I'll come with you. No, Jack said. You stay here. Her chin came up. Not because I'm telling you to, Jack said before she could say what her face was saying. Because if Whitmore has people watching and he does you walking into Hargrove's office, gives them something. You staying here gives them nothing. He held her gaze. Let me do this part. I'll be back before dark. A long pause. I don't like this, Clara said. I know. I don't like sitting. I know that too. She looked at him for another moment. Then she sat back down slowly, with the controlled, reluctant precision of someone who has decided that a thing is sensible, even though it is deeply uncomfortable. Be back before dark, she said. Yes, ma'am. He was at the door when Emma said, Mr. Mercer. He turned. She was looking at him with that measuring look that had started in the canyon and had been recalibrating degree by degree ever since. Thank you, she said, plainly. The way her mother had said it the night before, not warmly, not softly, just honestly. Jack put his hat on. Don't thank me yet, he said. He rode hard into Laramie. Hargrove took one look at the order and said a word that Emma would not have been allowed to hear, and then he sat down and read it through twice more and said it again quieter. Fenwick, he said. That's the judge who signed it, Jack said. Harold Fenwick of the Cheyenne Territorial Court. He's signed 3 previous orders favorable to Whitmore Land Company interests in the last 2 years. Hargrove set the paper down. He's not corrupt. That's the worst of it. He's just easily convinced by men with money and lawyers who speak in long sentences. Can you challenge it? I can file a counter petition. I can argue the fraud in the underlying property dispute makes the guardianship claim invalid. But Jack? Hargrove looked at him. This is going to take longer than 3 days. How long? 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. He paused. And in the meantime, that order is technically enforceable. The word sat between them like something with weight. Meaning, Jack said. Meaning if Harlan Whitmore shows up at your ranch with a territorial marshal holding that paper, you cannot physically prevent him from taking those children. Hargrove held his gaze. You'd be in contempt of a court order. Jack was quiet for a long moment. What if there were grounds to question Fenwick's jurisdiction? He said. Hargrove tilted his head. What kind of grounds? Clara Whitmore was a resident of Cheyenne. She left the city 4 weeks ago. If she establishes residency in Laramie County, Fenwick's court may not have jurisdiction over a guardianship petition filed in a different county. Hargrove stared at him. Where did you learn territorial residency law? I had 3 years with nothing to do but read, Jack said. After the war. Hargrove picked up his pencil. It's not airtight, he said slowly, but it creates a question, and a question buys time. He was already writing. She'd need to make a formal declaration in front of a Laramie County official. Can you arrange that? Tonight? Tonight. Hargrove looked at the clock on his wall. Then he stood up and reached for his coat. My brother-in-law is the county clerk, he said. He owes me more than one favor, and he does not like Harlan Whitmore. He paused. Whitmore bought the land next to his family's farm 6 years ago and ran cattle over the fence line for 2 seasons until the family gave up and sold. He shrugged into his coat. Personal motivations are not ideal, but they're reliable. Jack rode back with Hargrove at a pace that left the horses sweated and blowing, and Clara was on the porch when they arrived, standing, not sitting, because Clara Whitmore did not wait for news sitting down. She read the residency declaration in the lamplight at the kitchen table, Hargrove explaining each section, and she asked 3 precise questions that made Hargrove pause each time before answering, and then she signed it. The county clerk, a thin, narrow-faced man named Arthur Pierce, who looked like he'd been folded too many times, witnessed it with the gravity of a man who understood exactly what he was witnessing, and had made a private decision about which side of it he wanted to be on. When they were done, and Pierce and Hargrove had gone, Clara sat at the table for a long moment with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance. Jack put coffee on. Emma came out of the back room, which meant she'd been awake the whole time. She sat across from her mother without speaking, and her mother looked at her, and they held that look the way they did. That compressed private communication, and something passed between them that settled them both slightly. The way things settle when two people who have been in the same storm together acknowledge to each other that they're still standing. "Noah asleep?" Clara asked. "He tried to wait up," Emma said. "He lasted about 10 minutes. Clara almost smiled. Jack set 2 mugs on the table and took his own to the chair near the window and left them to it. After a moment, Clara said without turning, "You know he's going to come now?" "I expect so," Jack said. "What Hargrove said, about not being able to stop him if he comes with a marshal. Hargrove's working on that. Hargrove is 1 lawyer in Laramie against 3 from Denver." Clara's voice was flat. Not defeated, just precise. "I've been counting the weight on both sides of this since Thomas died, and it never evens out." Jack looked at his coffee. "He sent men once," Clara continued. "They reported back. Now he knows where we are, and he knows you helped us. And he knows about the residency filing because Arthur Pierce talks and Whitmore pays people to listen." She turned to look at Jack. "He'll be here in 3 days, maybe 2. "Then Hargrove has 2 days instead of 3, Jack said. "And if that's not enough—" Jack looked at her straight. "Then we figure out what comes after that." Clara stared at him. "You said that like it's simple." "It's not simple," he said, "but it's the next thing." Emma was watching this exchange with that unblinking attention. After a moment, she said, "When my father was sick before he died, he told me something." Both adults looked at her. Emma's eyes were on the table. "He said the only thing that ever beat anything worth fighting was people who kept deciding to fight it one more time." She paused. "He said most things give up before the people do, if the people don't give up first." The room was quiet. Clara reached across the table and covered Emma's hand with hers. Emma turned her hand over and held on. It was the most openly she'd allowed herself to need her mother since the canyon, and Jack looked away from it deliberately, giving them the privacy of it. He looked out the window at the dark Wyoming summer night at the stars, hanging low and dense, the way they did in dry seasons, and he thought about Harlan Whitmore riding toward this ranch from the south. And what a man who had spent 15 years acquiring things through patience and pressure and the careful application of legal mechanisms would look like when he finally arrived to collect what he'd decided was already his. And he thought about what it was going to take to make sure that when that man arrived, the answer waiting for him was something he had not accounted for. 3 days. Maybe 2. He was still at the window when the sound reached him. Faint, distant, the particular pattern of it wrong, in a way that took his mind a moment to name. A horse, alone, moving fast. Not on the road, coming across the back field. Jack was on his feet before he'd finished processing it, and he was at the door, and Clara said, "What?" And he said, "Stay inside," in a voice that didn't invite discussion, and he went out. The rider came out of the dark and pulled up at the gate, and Jack had his hand on his colt before he recognized the horse. A bay with a white left foreleg belonging to his neighbor, a rancher named Silas Croft, who ran cattle on the spread to the west. Silas was breathing hard. Not from the ride, from something else. "Jack," he said, "I just came from town." "What happened?" Silas looked at the house, at the lit window, back at Jack. "Harlan Whitmore rode into Laramie tonight," he said. 2 hours ago. He's got 4 men with him and a territorial marshal and a lawyer out of Denver that people are saying cost more per day than most men make in a month." Jack's hand stayed on the colt. "He's at the hotel," Silas continued. "And he was asking around town about Walter Hargrove." Silas paused. "He knew about the residency filing, Jack. He knew about it before he'd been in town an hour." Jack looked back at the house, at the window, at the lit shape of Clara Whitmore visible through the glass, standing very still watching him. She'd said 2 days. He hadn't believed it. He believed it now. "Thank you, Silas," he said quietly. Silas hesitated. "You know what you're in the middle of." "Getting clearer," Jack said. "Every hour." Silas looked at the house again. Then he nodded and turned his horse and went back into the dark, and Jack stood at the gate for a long moment, with the warm Wyoming night pressing down around him, and the sound of Silas's horse fading into nothing. Then he went back inside. Clara was standing in the middle of the room. She'd heard enough through the window to know. Emma stood behind her. Noah was in the doorway to the back room, rumpled from sleep, looking between the adults with those enormous, careful eyes. Jack looked at Clara. "He's here," she said. Not a question. "He's in town," Jack said. "Tonight he stays in the hotel. Tomorrow he comes here." Clara held his gaze. Something in her face had gone very still, not afraid, not defeated, but gathered the way a person gathers themselves when they've known something was coming for a long time, and it has finally arrived, and there is a strange, terrible relief in the waiting being over. "Then tomorrow," she said. "Yes." Noah padded across the floor in his socks and stopped beside Jack and looked up at him. "Are you scared?" he asked. Jack looked down at the boy. He thought about lying. "A little," he said. Noah nodded solemnly. "Me too," he said. "But Papa said scared means you care about something." He thought for a moment. "I think that's right." Jack put his hand briefly on the boy's shoulder, just for a second, just a light contact, and Noah didn't pull away. "Go back to bed," Jack said. "Okay," Noah said. He went without argument back to the room, and the door closed behind him. The three of them. Jack, Clara. Emma stood in the kitchen in the lamplight, and the weight of what tomorrow held pressed down on all of them equally, and none of them spoke because there wasn't anything left to say that the silence didn't already hold. Finally, Emma uncrossed her arms. "I'll make more coffee," she said. Nobody argued. Nobody slept much that night. Jack knew this not because he heard anyone moving, but because the house had a particular quality of stillness that only happens when people are lying very still and trying very hard to make it convincing. He'd heard that kind of stillness before in army camps the night before. Something was going to happen in the hours before dawn, when men who were afraid of being seen as afraid went very quiet and very rigid and waited for the dark to end. He was up before the sun. He had coffee on, and the Colt cleaned and reloaded and sitting on the table within reach, not drawn, just present when Clara came out of the back room. She was fully dressed. Her hair was pinned. She looked like a woman who had decided somewhere in the long hours of that night exactly who she was going to be today, and had dressed accordingly. She looked at the Colt on the table, then at Jack. "You're not going to need that," she said. "Probably not," Jack said. "But I'd rather have it and not need it." She poured herself coffee and stood at the window and looked out at the road. "He'll come mid-morning," she said. "That's how he operates. Not first thing. He lets people worry through the morning first. He thinks it softens them." "Does it?" "It used to," she said. "On me." She drank her coffee. "Not anymore." Emma came out next, and then Noah, and they ate breakfast in a silence that was different from yesterday's silences, tighter, more alert, the silence of people listening for something underneath every other sound. Noah ate his eggs with great concentration, and then looked up and said, "What do we do if he tries to take us?" The table went quiet. Clara set her mug down. "He won't take you," she said. "But what if he tries?" "Noah, I want to know what to do," Noah said. His voice was very steady for a 7-year-old. "So I'm not scared of not knowing." Jack looked at the boy, then at Clara. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You stay close to your mother," Jack said. "Whatever happens, you don't go anywhere without your mother's hand. And if anyone tries to separate you from her, you make as much noise as you possibly can, and you don't stop making it." Noah absorbed this with his characteristic gravity. Like screaming. Exactly like screaming. Jack said. Noah nodded. He picked up his fork again. I'm good at that, he said with a matter-of-factness that was somehow both heartbreaking and steadying. Emma reached under the table and briefly gripped her brother's hand. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. But her hand stayed there for a moment before she let go. They heard the horses at 9:30. Not 2 riders this time. More. The sound of them coming up the road had a different weight, deliberate, unhurried, the particular pace of people who believe the outcome is already settled and are simply arriving to collect it. Jack stood. Clara stood. Emma pushed back from the table. Stay inside, Jack said, looking at Clara. That's not Clara. He said her name for the first time. Not Mrs. Whitmore, just Clara, and something in the directness of it stopped her. He wants to see you off balance. He wants you on his ground. If you come out that door before I've had a chance to establish what ground we're standing on, you give him the first move. He held her gaze. Let me have the first move. A long pause. 1 minute, she said. Then I'm coming out. He took it. He went out the door and closed it behind him and stood on the porch with his thumbs in his belt and his hat on and his Colt at his hip, and he watched Harlan Whitmore and his party come up the road to his gate. Harlan Whitmore was not what Jack had expected, and he recognized immediately that this was intentional. He was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with a broad open face that was still handsome in the way of men who had been very handsome young and had maintained it through will and care. He rode a fine gray horse with the easy seat of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. His clothes were good without being ostentatious. He'd made a choice there, Jack understood. A man who showed up in a fine suit looked like money. A man who showed up looking like a better-dressed version of everyone else looked like authority. Behind him came 4 riders, and beside him came a man in a dark coat carrying a leather satchel who had lawyer written in every line of his posture, and behind them all, wearing the star of the Wyoming Territorial Marshal's office, rode a heavy-set man with a flat expression who looked like someone doing a job he found neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just necessary. Whitmore stopped at the gate and looked at Jack on the porch. Then he smiled. It was a good smile, warm even, the smile of a man encountering a neighbor. Mr. Mercer, he said, I'm Harlan Whitmore. I know who you are, Jack said. Then you know why I'm here. I know why you think you're here, Jack said. Come up to the porch if you want to talk. Your men can wait at the gate. A small pause. Whitmore's smile didn't change. Fair enough, he said pleasantly. He dismounted and came through the gate alone, just him and the lawyer, and crossed to the porch with the unhurried gait of a man who had never in his life been made to feel he was trespassing. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps and looked up at Jack, and the smile was still there. Still warm, and Jack understood now what Clara had meant. The charm was real. It was just completely disconnected from anything it appeared to be connected to. I want to thank you for looking after my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren, Whitmore said. His voice was low and measured and carried genuine-sounding gratitude. That was a Christian thing you did, finding them in that canyon. They needed help, Jack said. They did, and you provided it. Whitmore nodded. I'm here to take that burden off your hands, Mr. Mercer. Clara and the children will come with me today. I have arrangements made in Cheyenne. Mrs. Whitmore isn't leaving, Jack said. The smile stayed. Something behind it shifted by about 2 degrees. I have a court order, Whitmore said. I'm aware of the order. So is Mrs. Whitmore's attorney. Attorney. Whitmore said the word with a quality that wasn't quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. Walter Hargrove. Yes. He clasped his hands in front of him. Mr. Hargrove is a competent man for local matters. This is somewhat beyond local matters, I'm afraid. Maybe so, Jack said. But until a court with proper jurisdiction says otherwise, Mrs. Whitmore is a resident of Laramie County, and that order was issued in Cheyenne, and Mr. Hargrove has filed a jurisdictional challenge that's currently before the Laramie County Court. He kept his voice level. So, the order you're holding isn't enforceable here, today. The silence that followed was very brief, but it was there. The lawyer with the satchel leaned toward Whitmore and said something in a low voice. Whitmore listened without taking his eyes off Jack. "That's a creative interpretation," Whitmore said. "That's the law," Jack said. "The law." Whitmore's voice stayed pleasant. "You know, Mr. Mercer, I've found that the law is most useful to people who can afford to use it well, and I've been using it for a long time." He tilted his head slightly. "You're a rancher, a decent one from what I understand. Small spread, good water, nothing flashy. A man with something to lose." A pause, warm and almost sympathetic. "You don't want to be in the middle of this." "Seems like I already am," Jack said. "There's middle and there's deeper," Whitmore said. "Right now, you're in the middle. If you stand on this porch and prevent a legal—" "I'm not preventing anything," Jack said. "I'm telling you what the law says. If you want to take that up with the Laramie County Court, Mr. Hargrove will meet you there." He held Whitmore's gaze. "You want to come inside and have coffee while we sort out the jurisdictional question? I'll pour you a cup. You want to send your marshal through that door on an unenforceable order? I'll have him removed from my property by the county sheriff. And I'll have the whole thing written up for the territorial governor's office before noon." Something moved in Whitmore's eyes. Not anger, something cooler than anger and more durable. The door opened behind Jack. Clara stepped onto the porch. Jack had given her a minute. She'd waited almost 2. But she came out now, and she stood beside Jack, not behind him, and she looked at Harlan Whitmore with an expression that had nothing in it that he could use. Whitmore looked at her. "Clara," he said, and the warmth in his voice shifted into something that was trying to sound like concern. "I've been worried about you." "I'm sure you have," Clara said. "The children are inside, and they're staying inside." Whitmore's expression moved toward something that wanted to look like sadness. "Clara, I know we've had our difficulties, but Thomas would have wanted—" "Thomas wanted me to have the ranch," Clara said. "He wanted his children raised in their home. He told me so, and he wrote it down, and Mr. Hargrove has the journal where he wrote it." She took one step forward. "Don't use my husband's name to take what he spent his life building." The warmth in Whitmore's face underwent a subtle change. Not disappearing, recalibrating. Jack watched it happen and understood what Clara had been living with for the past 8 months. "The journal," Whitmore said to his lawyer quietly. The lawyer said something back. Whitmore listened, and when the lawyer finished, something happened behind Whitmore's eyes that Jack filed carefully away. He hadn't known about the journal. That was the first thing he hadn't accounted for. Jack could see it, the tiny recalculation happening behind that pleasant, composed face. "We'll resolve this in court," Whitmore said. He said it in the tone of a man who is gracious in his patience. "Yes," Clara said. "We will." Whitmore looked at her for a moment, then at Jack. The smile returned, but it was thinner now, and there was something underneath it that had given up pretending. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mr. Mercer," he said. "I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be," Jack said. Whitmore held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he turned and walked back to his horse and his men, and they rode away down the road with the same unhurried pace they'd arrived with, and Jack stood on the porch and watched them until they were gone. Clara let out a breath. It was controlled, but it was long. "He didn't know about the journal," Jack said. "No." Clara's voice was very quiet. "Thomas wrote it in the last weeks of his life. He didn't tell his father." A pause. "Thomas knew what his father was. In the end, he knew." Jack nodded. "This isn't over," Clara said. "No, ma'am. He'll be in front of a judge by tomorrow morning. So will Hargrove." She turned to look at him. The morning light was full and hard on her face, and she looked tired in the way that people who have been strong for a very long time look tired deep in the bone, not just in the expression. "You stood up to him," she said. "I told him what the law says." "People don't do that to Harlan Whitmore," she said. "Not people who have something to lose." "Maybe that's the problem," Jack said. Emma appeared in the doorway. She'd been watching through the window Jack realized had probably heard most of it. He's going to come back with more, she said. Yes, Jack said. What's more? More lawyers, more pressure, maybe a different judge. Jack looked at her. But we've got things he doesn't know we have, and Hargrove's going to use every one of them. Emma looked at him with that measuring gaze. Then she said, You're not scared of him. I told your brother I was a little scared, Jack said. Of him specifically, Emma said. You're not scared of him. Jack thought about that. I've seen men like him before, he said. Men who've won so many times they've forgotten that winning isn't guaranteed. That's its own kind of weakness. Emma took this in the way she took most things seriously, thoroughly filing it somewhere. Then she went back inside. Clara was still looking at the road. He'll target you next, she said. If he can't get to us directly, he'll come at you. Your water right, your property line, something. I know, Jack said. She turned to look at him, and for the first time since the canyon, the look she gave him wasn't measuring or calculating or guarded. It was simply direct, one person looking at another, without the protective infrastructure she usually kept between herself and the world. Why are you still doing this? She said. Because it's right, Jack said. That's the same answer you gave me in the canyon. It's still the same answer, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned and went back inside, and Jack stood on the porch alone, with the summer heat building toward its daily worst, and he thought about Harlan Whitmore riding back toward Laramie, and what a man who had just encountered his first real obstacle in a long time would do with the unfamiliarity of it. The answer came faster than Jack expected. Hargrove arrived at the ranch at 2 in the afternoon, and he came fast, his horse lathered, and he was off the animal before it fully stopped. They moved, Hargrove said. He was breathing hard. Jack straightened from the fence post he'd been repairing. Moved what? Whitmore's lawyer filed in front of Judge Alderman in Laramie County. Not Fenwick, a different judge. Hargrove pulled a folded document from his coat. They withdrew the Cheyenne order and refiled here. They removed the jurisdictional problem we created. Jack was still. They used our own move against us, Clara said from behind him. She'd come out of the house when she heard Hargrove's horse. He let us file for residency. He wanted us to. Hargrove looked at her. It gave him grounds to refile in this jurisdiction, he said. Yes. He planned it, Clara said. Not surprised, just confirming something she'd suspected and hoped she was wrong about. How much time do we have? Jack said. Alderman will hear arguments day after tomorrow, Hargrove said. That's the good news. The bad news is that Whitmore's Denver lawyer is very good, and we have 2 days to counter a case he's been building for 8 months. The three of them stood there in the heat. Then Clara said, The journal. Hargrove looked at her. Thomas's journal. You said it documents his wishes, his intent for the property. She looked at Hargrove. Does it also document what his father was doing, the pressure, the offers? Hargrove paused. If it does, it does, Clara said. Thomas wrote everything. He processed everything on paper. It was how he was made. Her voice softened involuntarily on those last words, then steadied. There are 4 months of entries from the year before he died. He wrote about every conversation with his father, every request, every offer. Hargrove stared at her. That's not just a statement of intent. That's a documented pattern of coercion. Can you use it? Jack said. If I can get it properly entered as evidence, yes. Hargrove was already moving back toward his horse. I need that journal tonight, Clara. I'll get it, Clara said. She turned toward the house and stopped. She turned back. Walter, what are our chances? Hargrove was an honest man. Jack had always known this about him, and it was the reason he'd brought Clara to his office 2 days ago. An honest man gives you the real number. Hargrove thought about it. Before today, I'd have said 60-40 in our favor. Whitmore made a mistake by being too aggressive too fast. Judges don't like to feel managed. He paused. Now that he's corrected the jurisdictional problem 50-50, maybe 55 in his favor. Clara nodded. One short nod. But, Hargrove said, I've never walked into a courtroom with a dead man's handwritten account of being coerced by the opposing party. That changes the number. I just don't know by how much yet. Clara went inside. Hargrove looked at Jack. She's extraordinary, you know, he said. I know, Jack said. Most people would have folded 6 months ago. He paused. Whitmore probably counted on that. He miscounted, Jack said. That evening something happened that none of them had anticipated. Silas Croft came back. But this time he didn't come alone. He came with 4 men, neighboring ranchers, men Jack knew from years of fence-line conversations and shared water disputes and the particular fellowship of people who live hard lives in the same hard piece of country. Men named Garrett and Webb and the Kowalski brothers, who had been in Wyoming longer than anyone else and spoke with the flat certainty of people who had survived enough to know what mattered. They came through the gate and stopped in the yard, and Silas said without preamble, "We heard what Whitmore did. We heard about the filing and the men he sent and the marshal." Jack looked at them. "We also heard," Silas continued, "that he's been asking around town about your water right, whether there's a challenge to the survey line on your eastern boundary." He paused. "And Garrett's had Whitmore's men riding his fence line for the past week." Garrett, a large, quiet man with a sun-darkened face, nodded once. "He's not just after her land," Jack said. "He never is," Silas said. "Her land is the door. Once he has the water right that comes with it, he can squeeze everyone on the North Range." He looked at Jack. "Including you." Jack stood with this for a moment. Clara had come to the porch. She was looking at the 5 men in the yard, and her expression was something Jack hadn't seen on her before, not calculation, not guarded assessment, but something slower and less defended. "You don't have to be part of this," she said to them. "This isn't your fight." "Ma'am," Silas said, not unkindly. "That's what we thought about the Hendersons when Whitmore squeezed them out 3 years ago, and the Perrys the year after." He looked at her straight. "We've been watching him take the territory apart piece by piece and telling ourselves each time it wasn't our business." He paused. "We were wrong." Clara pressed her lips together. Noah appeared in the doorway behind her, looked at the 5 men in the yard, and then looked at his mother. "Are those the good ones?" he asked. Silas looked up at the boy. "We're trying to be son," he said. Noah seemed to find this acceptable. He came and stood beside his mother on the porch and regarded the men with his characteristic serious attention. Jack looked at his neighbors. 5 men. Modest spreads, all of them. Men who had their own problems and their own tight seasons and their own reasons to stay out of something that was, strictly speaking, not yet their direct concern. And they'd come anyway, at the end of a long day, because they'd decided that this time they weren't going to wait until it was. "Come inside," Jack said. "There's coffee. We've got a court date day after tomorrow, and we need to talk about what we know." They came inside. They sat around Jack's kitchen table. 5 ranchers and a widow and a lawyer's documents and a dead man's journal. And they talked until the lamp oil was getting low, and what emerged from that conversation was something Harlan Whitmore had not accounted for in any of his filings or his orders or his careful, patient 15-year campaign. A community that had finally decided to stop calculating whether it was worth it. Emma sat in the corner through most of it, listening, not speaking. When they finally all stood to leave, she looked at Jack. "He thought she was alone," Emma said quietly. "That's what all of this was built on, that she'd have to fight him alone." "Yes," Jack said. "He was wrong about that. Starting to look that way." Emma looked at the door the men had just gone out through. Then at the journal on the table which Hargrove had taken with him. Then at Jack. "My father would have liked you," she said. She said it simply, the way she said most true things, plainly, without dressing it up. Then she went to the back room without waiting for a response. Jack stood in the kitchen alone for a moment in the quiet that followed. Then Clara came back out from where she'd been seeing Noah to bed. She stopped in the doorway when she saw that it was just the 2 of them, and something in the quality of the room shifted slightly. "Thank you," she said. "For today." Hargrove did the legal work, Jack said. I'm not talking about the legal work, she said. He looked at her. She was standing in the doorway with her arms at her sides, not crossed, not braced, just open. And that openness cost her something. He could see it, the small visible effort of a woman who had kept herself very armored for a very long time, making a deliberate choice not to be. Whatever happens day after tomorrow, she said, I need you to know that. She paused. You didn't have to make this your fight. No, he said. I didn't. They looked at each other across the kitchen in the low lamplight. Then she said quietly, I haven't trusted a person easily in a long time. I know, Jack said. I'm trying, she said. I know that too, he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she said goodnight and went to her room and closed the door, and Jack stood in the kitchen in the dark and the quiet, and thought about day after tomorrow and what it would cost if they lost, and what it might mean if they didn't. Tomorrow, Hargrove would prepare. Tomorrow the neighbors would talk to their own people. Tomorrow, Harlan Whitmore would be doing the same with more resources and more practice, and the particular confidence of a man who had never lost anything he'd decided to take. The night was very quiet. Jack put the lamp out and sat for a while in the dark, and he thought about a girl in a canyon, standing between her family and the world, with nothing but a broken board and the refusal to move. He thought there might be something to learn from that. The morning of the hearing, Clara was up before Jack. He found her at the kitchen table with Thomas's journal open in front of her, not reading it. Just sitting with her hand flat on the open page. The way you put your hand on something you need to feel is real. She didn't look up when he came in. She knew it was him. You should eat something, Jack said. I know. You're not going to. Probably not. She turned a page slowly. He wrote about the first time his father asked him to sign over the water right. Thomas was 26. He wrote. She stopped. Her hand pressed the page a little flatter. He wrote that he understood then that his father didn't love the land. He just needed it. She paused. Thomas loved it. That's the difference. Jack put coffee in front of her and sat down across the table. He was a good man, Clara said. Not a question. Not grief exactly, something steadier than grief, the kind of thing that's left after grief has done most of its work. Sounds like it, Jack said. He would have liked you, she said. Emma said that last night. She told me. Clara looked up for the first time. She doesn't say things like that easily. I know, Jack said. I took it seriously. Clara held his gaze for a moment. Then she closed the journal and stood and said, Let's go. They rode into Laramie in Jack's wagon, him and Clara on the bench, Emma and Noah in the back, the journal in a leather satchel on Clara's lap. Hargrove met them at the courthouse steps. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, which was accurate, and like a man who had used the sleepless hours well, which was also accurate. Alderman is a fair judge, Hargrove said quietly, walking beside Clara toward the door. He doesn't like being managed, and he doesn't like men who assume his courtroom is a formality. If we can show him the pattern, the coercion, the false title dispute, the coordinated pressure, he'll see it for what it is. And Whitmore's lawyer, Clara said. Good, very good. Hargrove paused. But he's working with a client who made mistakes. Being too fast, too aggressive. Judges notice when a man is in a hurry to take something. He looked at her. Are you ready? I've been ready for 8 months, Clara said. They went in. Harlan Whitmore was already there. He was seated at the opposing table with his Denver lawyer, and he was dressed impeccably, and when Clara walked in, he looked at her with that same composed, warm expression he'd worn on Jack's porch, the face of a man who has decided how the day is going to end, and is simply waiting for it to catch up with him. Jack sat in the gallery behind Clara. Emma sat beside him, straight-backed hands folded in her lap. Noah sat on Emma's other side close enough that his shoulder pressed into her arm, and Emma let it. Silas Croft was there. Garrett. The Kowalski brothers. Webb. They filled 3 rows of the gallery men who had gotten up early and put on their best clothes and ridden into town because they had decided finally that showing up was the minimum a person could do. Whitmore noticed them. Jack watched him. Watched the brief recalculation behind that composed face. Watched the Denver lawyer lean over and say something that Whitmore answered with a small dismissive shake of his head. That was the first mistake Whitmore made that morning. Dismissing it, Judge Alderman came in, and the room stood and sat, and Alderman looked out over the courtroom with the alert, somewhat impatient eyes of a man who had seen enough of human nature to waste very little time on its performances. "Let's begin," he said. Whitmore's lawyer went first. He was smooth and precise, and he built his case the way a skilled man builds anything, foundation first. Each piece laid cleanly on top of the last. He presented the guardianship argument, an unstable living situation, an abandoned property, a woman who had taken children across territory without fixed destination or means. He presented it respectfully without malice, which was more effective than malice would have been. Jack watched Clara's face during this. She kept it still, completely still. Only her hands out of sight below the table told the truth, and only Jack was at the right angle to see them, one hand gripping the satchel strap, the other flat on her thigh. Then Hargrove stood up. He was not smooth. He was not the kind of lawyer who made a courtroom feel like a performance. He was the kind who made it feel like a conversation you'd better pay attention to because the words mattered, and he wasn't going to repeat them. He started with Thomas's journal. He didn't quote it at length. He read 3 specific entries: the first offer, the third refusal, and an entry from 2 months before Thomas died, in which Thomas had written in plain and private language that his father had told him the property would pass to him one way or another, and that Clara should understand that before she made any plans. He read them without inflection, without theatrical pause, just the dead man's words in his own private voice, recorded in ink, undeniable. The courtroom was very quiet. Alderman was leaning slightly forward. Whitmore's jaw had not moved, but something around his eyes had. Then Hargrove laid out the false title dispute. He had documentation, a letter from the man who had been spreading the rumor, a man who had been paid, and Hargrove had found the payment. Not directly to the man, through a land management company that held 3 contracts with Whitmore Land Company. It wasn't a confession, but it was a thread, and Alderman was the kind of judge who pulled threads. "Your Honor," Hargrove said, "I want to be clear about what this evidence establishes. It establishes that the conditions cited to justify this guardianship petition, the abandoned property, the unsettled living situation, the financial instability, were not the natural results of Mrs. Whitmore's failures. They were the manufactured results of a coordinated effort by the petitioner to create exactly those conditions." He paused. A man cannot engineer a woman's vulnerability and then cite that vulnerability as grounds to take her children. The silence that followed that sentence was the kind that happens when something true gets said plainly in a room full of people who needed to hear it. Alderman looked at Whitmore's lawyer. "Counselor, would you like to respond to the payment documentation?" Whitmore's lawyer stood. He was still composed, but there was a quality to his composure now that was different from an hour ago. It was working harder. "Your Honor, the connection between the land management company and Mr. Whitmore's holdings is direct," Hargrove said. "I have the contract filings." "Mr. Hargrove," Alderman said, not unkindly but firmly, "My apologies, Your Honor." Whitmore's lawyer regrouped. He argued the connection was circumstantial. He argued that Thomas's journal entries, while affecting, were the private writings of a man in declining health and not legally binding testimony. He argued that the children's welfare remained the central question, and that question had not been adequately addressed. Alderman listened. He gave every word its full due, which was the thing about him that made him a fair judge and also an unpredictable one. Then he said, "I'd like to hear from Mrs. Whitmore." Clara stood. She walked to where Hargrove indicated, and she stood there, and she looked at Judge Alderman, and she did not look at Harlan Whitmore. Alderman looked at her. "Mrs. Whitmore, in your own words. Not legal language, not argument. Tell me about your children." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Emma is 13. She stood between her unconscious mother and a strange man in a canyon with a broken board in her hands, and she held that ground until she decided on her own that he was safe. She paused. She made the right call. She always does. She's been making the right call since her father got sick because someone had to, and she didn't wait to be asked. She paused again. Noah is 7. He memorizes the names of horses and asks strangers if they're lonely, and tells the truth even when it costs him something. Her voice had stayed level through all of this. I am not a perfect mother. I have made mistakes, and I have been frightened, and I have not always had enough of what they needed. She looked at Alderman directly. But I have never not once failed to put them first, and I will not begin today. The courtroom was completely still. Alderman wrote something, then he looked at Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, he said, you may address the court. Whitmore stood. And here was the thing about Harlan Whitmore even now. Even with Thomas's journal entered, and the payment documented, and Clara's words still in the air, he was composed. He was comfortable. He had been in rooms like this before, and he had learned that rooms like this were in the end responsive to the right kind of pressure applied with enough patience. Your Honor, he said warmly, I am simply a grandfather concerned for the welfare of his son's children. Everything I've done has been motivated by that concern. Everything, Alderman said. A brief pause. Everything, Your Honor. Alderman looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at the papers in front of him. Then he looked at Whitmore's lawyer. Counselor, the payment documentation. Mr. Hargrove has presented your client was aware of the land management company's activities regarding the Whitmore property title. A pause. A longer pause. My client was aware of certain business activities. Yes or no, Counselor? The Denver lawyer looked at his client. Whitmore gave him a look that contained an instruction. The lawyer looked back at Alderman. In an oversight capacity, yes, Your Honor. The word oversight did a great deal of work in that sentence, and everyone in the room knew it. Alderman wrote something else. He wrote for long enough that the silence became its own kind of pressure. Then he said, I'm going to take a recess. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. He stood and left, and the room stood with him, and then erupted into the particular noise of a space full of people who have been holding something tightly and have just been given permission to let it shift slightly. Clara turned around. She looked at Jack. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She just held his gaze for a moment, and then she sat down, and Hargrove put his hand on the table near hers, not touching, just near, and she stared at the front of the courtroom and breathed. Emma leaned forward from the gallery and said very quietly close to her mother's ear, You were incredible. Clara reached back without turning and gripped her daughter's hand. Noah, on Emma's other side, was watching Harlan Whitmore across the room with the focused, unreadable expression he wore when he was working something out. Then he looked at Jack and said in a whisper that was slightly too loud, He's not as scary as I thought he'd be. Jack put a hand briefly on the boy's knee. Good, he whispered back. The hour was the longest Jack could remember in recent years. Hargrove went over papers. Clara sat still and straight and didn't speak. Whitmore and his lawyer had a quiet and apparently tense conversation in the corner of the room that ended with Whitmore making a single flat gesture with his hand that closed the conversation. Silas Croft appeared at Jack's shoulder during the recess and said low, How do you think it's going? Hard to say, Jack said. That journal entry, Silas said. The one Hargrove read. About Whitmore telling Thomas that Clara should understand the property would pass to him one way or another. What about it? If I were that judge, Silas said, I wouldn't need anything else. Jack hoped he was right. Alderman came back. The room settled. He did not make them wait. This court finds, he said in the measured, deliberate tone of a man who chooses every word precisely, that the guardianship petition filed by Harlan Whitmore contains material misrepresentations regarding the circumstances that gave rise to the petition. He paused. Specifically, the court finds credible evidence that conditions cited as grounds for the petition were influenced by actions taken by or on behalf of the petitioner. A man cannot manufacture the conditions of a crisis and then cite those conditions as justification for intervention. He had used almost exactly the language Hargrove had used. Jack felt something loosen in his chest. "The petition is denied," Alderman said. "The temporary order previously issued is vacated." He looked at Whitmore directly. "Furthermore, this court is referring the matter of the disputed property title to the Territorial Attorney General's office for review of potential fraudulent interference." He paused. "Mrs. Whitmore retains full legal custody of her children. This matter is closed." He struck the gavel. The room came apart. Not loudly, there were people in it who were too tired for loud. But Silas Croft said something under his breath that was probably a prayer. Garrett's shoulders dropped 2 inches. The Kowalski brothers looked at each other with the quiet relief of men who had come prepared for a loss and received something better. Clara did not move for 3 full seconds. Then Emma's hand came over the gallery railing and landed on her mother's shoulder, and Clara reached up and covered it with her own, and she pressed her lips together very hard. And she did not cry. But it was close. It was very close, and nobody looked at her for a moment, because everyone in that room understood that some victories need a second of privacy, even when they happen in public. Jack looked at Noah. Noah was looking at Harlan Whitmore. Whitmore was standing with his lawyer, both of them quiet. The warmth was gone from his face completely. What was left was something older and harder. Not grief, not remorse, just the cold, bare face of a man who has encountered an outcome he did not plan for and is already reorganizing around it. He looked like exactly what he was stripped of the charm that had covered it. He looked across the room and found Jack's eyes. Jack held the look. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Whitmore looked away first. His lawyer picked up the satchel, and they walked out without speaking to anyone, and the room felt different after they left lighter, as rooms do when something heavy has exited them. Hargrove shook Clara's hand, and then unexpectedly shook Emma's too, with the gravity of a man acknowledging someone who has earned it. Emma accepted this with a straight back and a firm grip, and the particular dignity of a 13-year-old girl who has just watched her family win something and hasn't yet decided how to feel about the fact that it required a fight at all. They walked out of the courthouse into the full force of the Wyoming summer. The heat was the same as it had been every day since Jack had found them in that canyon, relentless, pressing the kind that made everything real and immediate and stripped away whatever wasn't necessary. But it felt different standing in it now. Or maybe he felt different standing in it. Noah walked out and stopped on the top step, and turned his face up to the sun with his eyes closed for a moment, the way children do when they're feeling something they don't have words for, and the sun is the closest available thing to put it toward. Then he opened his eyes and looked up at Jack. "Is it over?" he asked. "This part," Jack said. Noah thought about this. "What's the next part?" Jack looked at Clara. She was standing at the top of the courthouse steps with Hargrove saying something to her that made her nod, and she was holding the journal satchel against her side with one arm, and the other hand was free, hanging open at her side, and she looked for the first time since the canyon, for the first time since he'd known her, like a woman who was not bracing for the next thing. She looked like a woman who was simply standing in the sun. She finished with Hargrove, and he went back inside, and she turned and found Jack looking at her, and she came to stand beside him at the top of the steps. They stood there for a moment, the 4 of them looking out at the main street of Laramie, with its summer dust and its familiar noise, and the horses at the hitching posts, and the unremarkable ordinary life of a Wednesday in a Wyoming town. "Hargrove says the Attorney General's review could clear the title completely," Clara said. "If it does, the property in Cheyenne is mine outright, no question." "That's good," Jack said. "It'll take time." "Most things do." She was quiet for a moment. "My brother is still in Colorado," she said. "David. He has good land near Pueblo. He's been asking me to come for 2 years." "I remember," Jack said. "You were on your way there." "I was running there," Clara said. "That's different." She paused. Running somewhere and choosing somewhere are different things. Jack looked at her. She was looking out at the street. "The children know this territory," she said. "Emma knows your dog's name, and Noah has apparently decided you make the best eggs in Wyoming, which is not a small endorsement from him." She paused. And I've been thinking about what my husband wrote. About how the land wasn't just property. It was the place where he felt like himself. A pause. I haven't felt like myself in a long time. No, Jack said. I felt something close to it, she said carefully, at your kitchen table, with your neighbors sitting around it talking about what they knew and what they were willing to do. She looked at him. I felt something close to it. Jack said nothing. He let the words be what they were. Emma standing 2 steps below them with Noah said without turning around. Noah, don't put that in your pocket. I'm just keeping it, Noah said. It's a rock. It's a good rock. From in front of the courthouse. He held it up for inspection. I want to remember today. Emma looked at the rock, then at her brother. All right, she said in the tone of someone making a reasonable exception. Fine. Noah pocketed the rock with great satisfaction and took Emma's hand, and Emma let him, and they stood there on the courthouse steps in the July heat, and for a moment nobody needed to say anything at all. Then Clara said quietly to Jack, I don't want to start over again. He looked at her. I'm tired, she said. Not of fighting. I'll fight whatever needs fighting. I'm tired of starting over, of packing what I can carry and going somewhere new and building something from nothing again. She held his gaze. I don't want to do that again. Jack held her gaze for a long moment. Then don't, he said. The words were simple. They were the simplest words he'd said in all of this in the whole long arc of it from the canyon to the courtroom. But they landed with the weight of something that had been decided over the course of many days, not in one moment, not in a single exchange, but in the accumulated evidence of a man who showed up and stayed and did not require anything in return for either of those things. Clara looked at him for a long time. Something in her face moved, not cracked, not broken, just shifted the way things shift when a person allows themselves to stop holding everything at arm's length and simply stands in what is. You'd want that, she said. The 3 of us. All the noise and the complications, and Clara, he said. She stopped. I found you in a canyon, he said. I turned my horse around when I could have kept riding. I knew what I was doing. He paused. I knew what I was choosing. She was quiet. Noah, without looking up from his rock, said, Emma said you were going to say something like that eventually. Emma made a sound that was pure exasperation. Noah. She told me last night. Noah continued examining his rock. She said adults take forever to say what they mean, and we'd probably have to wait through a whole lot of quiet before anything happened. Clara looked at her son, then at Emma, who had turned away and appeared to be studying the hitching posts across the street with great interest. Jack almost laughed. It came out fully this time, a real laugh, quiet but genuine, and Clara heard it and turned toward it, and her face did something that it hadn't done once in all the days he'd known her. She smiled, not the ghost of one, not a controlled flicker at the corner of her mouth. A real smile, full and unguarded, the kind that belongs to a person before the world has taught them to ration it. And for a moment, she looked exactly like herself. Whoever that person had been before, 8 months of fighting and fear had put so many layers over her. She looked like someone who had just remembered that she still existed underneath all of it. Emma finally turned back around. She looked at her mother's face, then at Jack. She gave him the same long measuring look she'd been giving him since the canyon, the same calculating intelligence, the same careful assessment. And then quietly, Emma Whitmore nodded. Not a word, not a gesture of welcome exactly, just a nod. The nod of a girl who has been watching a man for days and has finally finished counting and arrived at a number she can accept. It was enough. More than enough. They walked down the courthouse steps together into the July sun. Clara and Jack and Emma and Noah with his courthouse rock in his pocket, and they walked to Jack's wagon at the hitching post, and they climbed in, and Jack took up the reins. Nobody said where they were going. They all already knew. The road back to the ranch was the same road they'd taken that morning, the same dust and the same heat and the same Wyoming sky, pressing down vast and blue and indifferent to everything beneath it, except in the way that vast things are indifferent, not unkindly, just larger than the individual moments happening under them. But the people on that wagon were not the same people who had driven in that morning. Something had been settled, not just in a courtroom, not just in legal language on official paper. Something older and simpler than that, the kind of thing that gets settled when people go through enough together that the question of who they are to each other stops being a question. Noah fell asleep against Emma's arm before they'd gone 2 miles. His hand still curved around the rock in his pocket. Emma looked down at him, and her face did the thing it always did when she looked at her brother, that involuntary softening, all the hard-won armor standing down for just a moment. She looked up and found Jack watching her in the small glance a driver can spare from the road. "Don't say it's going to be all right," she said. "I hate when people say that." "I wasn't going to," Jack said. "What were you going to say?" He thought about it for a moment. "That you did good," he said. "Back in that canyon, standing there with that board. You did exactly right." Emma looked at him for a moment. Her jaw worked slightly the way it did when she was controlling something. "I was scared," she said. "I know," Jack said. "You did it anyway." She looked away, but her shoulders dropped just slightly, the smallest release of something that had been held a long time. Clara's hand found Jack's on the reins. She didn't take them from him. She just put her hand over his and left it there, and he let her, and they drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was not empty, but full of everything that had happened, and everything that was over, and everything that was quietly and without ceremony, just beginning. When the ranch came into view, Rufus was at the gate. His tail was already moving. Noah woke up as the wagon stopped blinking, and confused, and looked around, and recognized the fence and the gate and the dog, and said with the simple certainty of a child who has decided where safety lives, "We're home." Nobody corrected him, because he was right. That was the whole of it. A woman who refused to be taken apart. 2 children who refused to be separated from what was theirs. A man who turned his horse when he could have kept riding. And the long, hard, honest work of people who decided that what mattered was worth standing in front of. Some things in this world take everything you have. And some things, if you hold long enough, give it all back.